when we eat food, typically, like our gut epithelial cells, we have a tight junction that's holding them together. When we eat food, they transiently open and then close. Like it's kind of a normal response, right? I would say the opposite end of the spectrum of that would be like celiac, where they eat gluten or something. It opens up and stays open, and so you get like a ton of LPS leakage into the system, which causes massive inflammation. It just happens with meals in general. You do get somewhat of a LPS response from a meal. Now, the type of meal does matter. So when I say refined carbohydrates, it's not necessarily like healthy, carbohydrates like vegetables. It's like you're eating something that is refined sugar, typically with saturated fat. So those types of foods really cause like LPS response. It's inflammation. It's bad. It's hard on the gut. But the postprandial inflammatory response essentially is that LPS getting into the system, activating the immune system, which draws the energy. I mean, it's very energy consuming to activate your immune system, right? That's why when you're sick, you're so sleepy too, right? Well, there's also cytokines that are somnogenic and promoting sleep, but like activating your immune system requires a ton of energy. And so when you're constantly activating the immune system, that's an energy sink, right? And so you do feel tired. And that's why a lot of times after a meal, you're feeling kind of lethargic.
Do protein foods of the sort that you listed off before, do they cause less opening of the tight junctions of the gut?
I think the big deal with the opening of the tight junctions in the gut is, eating a big meal will do it. Eating a very ultra-processed food meal will do it. Interestingly enough, just eating a bunch of saturated fat without a fiber matrix, so like butter, you're just like eating butter. Don't ever do that. But if you just eat butter, that's been shown.
My niece, when she was little, now she's all grown up, but when she was little, I taught her how to eat like a little bit of Kerrygold butter, and she loved it. So then we would do this thing where we'd do that. We won't do that anymore.
I mean, a little bit's fine, but
So
there's studies showing that it does, saturated fat is hard on the gut.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's a sliding scale. Like meals in general do it, but it's like you would think. The healthier foods that you're eating, like whole foods, you're getting less of that LPS response. And then of course there's gluten, and that complicates the whole story, especially for people that are celiac, right? Because
which is a small percentage of people are actually celiac, right? But a lot of people seem to believe, and I believe them, that when they eat gluten, they feel worse than when they don't eat gluten.
I'm sure there's some people that are sensitive to gluten that do feel worse. And then I'm sure some of that's the nocebo effect, right? That's been shown with gluten in particular. Have you seen that study? Where people, there were people that think they're, gluten sensitive. And so they were enrolled in this study. And these individuals were separated into two groups. One group was given the bread with gluten, and the other group was given the bread without gluten. And the people that were given the bread without gluten had a terrible, abdominal, they were bloated, they felt terrible. I mean, it was all, and there was no gluten in the actual bread, but they thought there was. So it was thought that there's a nocebo effect, where it's like the opposite of a placebo effect, where you've got that phenotype where you think things negative are going to happen, and you can make them happen. You can change your immune system, you can change your brain signaling, and so probably a combination of both with that regard. In addition to the lethargy, so I was talking about in the context, that's why it sparked my interest, is like you were talking about feeling tired after a meal, and I do think that is part of that reason for feeling sleepy. But what's interesting about LPS, you talked about injecting it to mice, and I've also done experiments injecting LPS into mice. There have been studies where people have been injected with an amount of LPS that is, similar to what you would find your gut releasing into your bloodstream, or a placebo control, which in this case was saline. And individuals that were injected with the LPS, high amounts of inflammatory markers like TNF-alpha, we're talking like up to a 50% increase. Whoa. Over baseline, right? So high amounts of inflammation, which makes sense. LPS is activating the immune. Your immune system is like, there's a foreign invader, right? It's not a foreign invader. It's just the food you ate that caused transient gut permeability. And those individuals also feel depressive symptoms and feelings of social withdrawal. So the inflammation is affecting the brain, right? These inflammatory factors are getting in the brain, crossing the blood-brain barrier, and affecting the way we feel. And we know now that inflammation plays a big role in major depressive disorder and depression, and not in all cases, but there's a subset, right, where it's really like it seems to play a big role. In fact, interestingly, there's been some studies showing that people that don't respond to SSRIs have very high amounts of C-reactive protein. So this was the biomarker for a classical biomarker for inflammation. I would argue it's not that sensitive, but nonetheless, it is a biomarker for inflammation. And so people that don't respond to SSRIs have high amounts of inflammation, which kind of raises this question of, is there like this subset of depression that's really inflammatory driven, right? Interesting. So the LPS is affecting not only our energy levels, but also our mood. And then, there's also evidence that, so we know that LPS binds to LDL particles through lipid-lipid interactions. And in fact, it's kind of part of the adaptive response. It's why you don't want to ever go get your cholesterol measured right after you're sick or had a very stressful event, something that causes inflammation, because you will increase VLDL production increases and LDL production increases. And it's sort of an adaptive response to bind that LPS to prevent it from causing more damage. And so it actually binds to LDL particles on the ApoB protein. So ApoB is a protein that is on these lipoproteins, and it's a very important protein because that is what's used by the LDL receptors present on our liver to recycle LDL particles. And so what happens is these LPS particles are now bound to our lipoproteins, and our lipoproteins are still doing their function, right? They're going around and they're giving triglycerides and fatty acids and to some degree cholesterol to our cells that need it, right? We're constantly making new cells and repairing, and our cells need that. As they donate triglycerides and fatty acids, they get smaller in size. The lipoproteins, you probably heard of small, dense LDL, right? Like that's a very dangerous type of LDL particle. And that's one that's kind of been donating along, getting rid of triglycerides and whatever. If you think about a train with cargo, it's donating, dropping off the cargo. And so when it's time to get recycled back into the liver, what do you know? The ApoB protein's obscured by that LPS, and it's not recycled. And so it gets lodged into the arterial wall. And because there's an LPS bound to this, small, dense LDL particle, macrophages, which are, as you mentioned, it's like the first line of defense against something like a bacterial invader, right? It comes and chews it up, right? Gets rid of the problem. So macrophages come in because they're seeing this signal of LPS and think it's a foreign invader when it's actually just a small, dense LDL particle bound to LPS that came from the gut, tries to engulf it, but it can't because it's not bacteria. And you get the macrophage stuck to that lipoprotein LPS, complex, and you get the formation of a foam cell. You've probably heard of a foam cell. It's the beginning of atherosclerosis. And so this is where gut health and the food we eat is it's linked to cardiovascular health, right? Gut permeability, getting that LPS into our circulation is actually not a very good thing because you're basically slow dripping in that inflammation, that inflammatory signal, and it's wreaking havoc in our arteries, on our brain,